Donald Trump reportedly drinks up to 12 Diet Cokes a day. 12. At that point, it stops sounding like a beverage preference and starts sounding like a full-time commitment. And depending on who you ask online, that means one of two things. Either Diet Coke is basically liquid poison, or people are massively overreacting to one of the most studied food additives in history. The truth, though, is a lot more interesting than either side wants to admit, because when you actually start digging into the research on aspartame, things get weird really fast. Some studies suggest artificial sweeteners may affect appetite, cravings, and even gut bacteria. Other studies show they can help people lose weight when used strategically. Some people swear diet soda helped them finally control calories, while others insist it made them hungrier and harder to stay on track. So what's actually the truth here? Does aspartame spike insulin even though it has almost no calories? Can it affect the microbiome? Why do some people lose weight using diet soda while other people seem to gain weight while drinking the exact same thing? And perhaps most importantly, are people obsessing over the wrong health problem entirely? Stay until the end, because I'm going to show you what the latest studies and meta-analyses actually say about aspartame, where some of the biggest myths came from, and the one factor that matters way more for weight loss than whether your soda says diet on the label. I'm Marcus, a research scientist with over 25 years of experience, also known as a wellness watchdog, and you're watching Health Sense or Nonsense. I spend hours reviewing the latest health studies so you don't have to. And today, we're driving to one of the internet's favorite health debates, because almost no nutrition topic makes people lose their minds faster than artificial sweeteners. Seriously, you can mention politics at dinner and maybe survive, but mention Diet Coke and suddenly everyone becomes a self-taught endocrinologist. So let's start with the basics. Aspartame is an artificial sweetener that's around 200 times sweeter than sugar, which is why companies can use very tiny amounts to make products taste sweet without adding many calories. It's commonly found in Diet Coke, sugar-free gum, protein bars, flavored yogurt, and a huge number of low-calorie foods. Chemically, it's made from two amino acids, which are basically the building blocks of protein: phenylalanine and aspartic acid. And immediately, this is where some people panic because they hear the word chemical and assume danger. But technically, water is a chemical too. A banana is full of chemicals. You are currently a collection of chemicals sitting somewhere watching YouTube while pretending you'll go to bed earlier tonight. The important question isn't whether something is a chemical. The real question is what effect it has on the human body, at what dose, and whether the evidence actually supports the fear. And this is where the aspartame conversation becomes incredibly messy, because aspartame has been studied heavily for decades. Major organizations like the FDA and the European Food Safety Authority have generally concluded that aspartame is safe within acceptable intake limit. Then headlines exploded in 2023 after the International Agency for Research on Cancer classified aspartame as possibly carcinogenic, and the internet reacted like people had discovered plutonium inside vending machines. What most headlines conveniently skipped is that possibly carcinogenic is an extremely broad classification. That same category includes things like aloe vera extract and working overnight shifts. It does not mean normal consumption clearly causes cancer in humans. It means there is limited evidence suggesting there could potentially be some risk under certain conditions. Recent reviews also haven't found consistent evidence that normal dietary aspartame intake increases cancer risk in humans, although researchers are still studying it. The nuance matters a lot, even though nuance usually gets destroyed the second social media enters the conversation. And when the WHO's expert committee and the FDA reviewed the data, they did not change the recommended daily intake for aspartame, meaning they still consider current exposure levels acceptable for the general population. Now, to be fair, this doesn't mean you should drink 12 diet sodas a day and assume there's absolutely no downside. But it also doesn't mean occasionally diet soda consumption is automatically a health apocalypse. Most experts would still agree that 12 cans a day is probably not an ideal long-term health strategy, even if it's likely better than drinking the same amount of full sugar soda. And this leads us into one of the biggest myths surrounding aspartame, the idea that it massively spikes insulin. You probably heard some version of this before online. Artificial sweeteners supposedly trick your body into storing fat, even though they contain little or no calories. Sounds convincing at first, right? But when researchers actually test this in controlled human studies, the results are surprisingly underwhelming. Most controlled human studies do not show large insulin spikes from aspartame alone in healthy individuals, especially compared to regular sugary drink. That's one reason artificial sweeteners become popular among people managing diabetes or trying to reduce calorie intake in the first place. The dramatic instant insulin disaster narrative simply doesn't line up very well with the available human evidence. Now, there are a few caveats here because biology loves making things complicated. Some studies suggest there may be a small cephalic phase insulin response, which is basically a tiny anticipatory insulin release that can happen when your brain tastes sweet. But even when researchers detect this effect, it's usually very small and nowhere near comparable to drinking a full sugar soda. Translation: your pancreas is probably not going into full emergency mode every time you sip Diet Coke. The internet just tends to take tiny physiological effects and inflate them into catastrophic metabolic collapse. But here's where things get more interesting. Insulin may not actually be the biggest issue for many people. Appetite and cravings might matter more. And this is where the research becomes much more individualized because different people seem to respond very differently to artificial sweeteners. Some people drink diet soda and without effort reduce calories without feeling deprived. Other people drink something sweet without calories and suddenly start hunting for snacks like a raccoon that found espresso. Researchers have been trying to understand why this happens. One theory is that sweet taste without accompanying calories may influence reward pathways in the brain. Your brain expects energy after tasting sweetness, and in some people, the mismatch may increase cravings later on. But once again, the data is inconsistent. Some studies show increased appetite, others show no effect, and some even show reduced calorie intake overall when people replace sugary beverages with low-calorie alternatives. And importantly, some of the strongest microbiome research so far involves other sweeteners like sucralose and saccharin, while data specifically on aspartame is still more limited. Researchers are still trying to understand whether these microbiome changes are temporary, meaningful, harmful, or sometimes completely neutral. Also, if you want to look at the research yourself, I'll link the sources and studies down in the description below. Let's get to the question most people actually care about: weight loss. Does aspartame help or hurt fat loss? And surprisingly, this is where the evidence becomes more favorable than many people expect. Several randomized controlled trials and meta-analyses have found that replacing sugar-sweetened beverages with low-calorie sweetened alternatives can help reduce calorie intake and support modest weight loss. Not drink Diet Coke and wake up with abs, but meaningful calorie reduction that can help over time. And honestly, this makes logical sense. If someone drinks multiple regular sodas daily and replaces them with diet versions, they could easily remove hundreds of calories from their diet. Over weeks and months, that adds up. Now, critics often point to observational studies showing diet soda drinkers sometimes have higher body weight. But the observational studies are tricky because correlation does not prove causation. People already struggle with weight are also more likely to choose diet products, which can create misleading associations. Quick reminder, this video is educational and not medical advice. If you have diabetes, gastrointestinal disorders, metabolic disease, or other specific health concerns, talk with your physician or a qualified registered dietitian. If you're enjoying this evidence-based myth-busting style of content, hit like and subscribe, because it generally helps the channel and tells YouTube there are still at least a few people on the internet who appreciate nuance more than fear-mongering. Here's what I personally think gets lost in almost every aspartame debate. People become hyper-focused on one ingredient while ignoring much bigger health variables. If someone sleeps 4 hours per night, never exercises, eats almost no fiber, lives under constant stress, and survives primarily on ultra-processed foods, the occasional Diet Coke Coke is probably not the main issue. Nutrition culture has a tendency to obsess over tiny details while ignoring the giant lifestyle problems sitting directly right in front of us. That doesn't mean details never matter. It just means priorities matter more. And I think a much better framework is asking, compared to drinking multiple sugary sodas every day, diet soda may absolutely be the better option for many people. Compared to water, unsweetened tea, or minimally processed beverages, diet soda is probably not the gold standard. Context matters, dose matters, overall diet quality matters, and individual response matters too. This is why some people do perfectly fine with artificial sweeteners, while others notice headaches, cravings, digestive issues, overeating tendencies after consuming them. Your own experience matters. One thing I always encourage people to do is pay attention to behavior after consuming certain foods or drinks. Do you feel more in control afterward or less in control? Do you stay satisfied or immediately start looking for snacks an hour later? That self-awareness is often more useful than extreme internet opinions. But some long-term observational studies have linked high intake of artificially sweetened beverages with obesity, diabetes, and cardiovascular disease. Although those studies can prove the sweeteners directly caused those outcomes. Can replacing sugary beverages with diet alternatives help support weight loss in some individuals? The evidence actually suggests yes. But none of this means unlimited consumption is automatically a fantastic idea either. The healthiest overall approach for most people is probably still a diet centered around minimally processed foods, adequate protein, fiber, sleep, movement, and calorie awareness, not obsessing over a single ingredient while ignoring everything else happening in their lifestyle. Because health is usually shaped by long-term patterns and habits, not one food or one drink in isolation. Now, whether Trump's Diet Coke habit is legendary dedication or simply proof that presidents also survive on caffeine and chaos, I'll let the historians figure that one out. But based on the current evidence, many of the internet's most dramatic claims about aspartame are probably overstated, at least for most people consuming it in moderation. Final quick disclaimer here. If you personally notice symptoms or negative effects after consuming artificial sweeteners, pay attention to your own body and discuss concerns with your personal healthcare professional. I'm Marcus, the Wellness Watchdog, and this has been Health Sense or Nonsense. Wellness Watchdog out.